with the choir.
But it's this morning is.
Yeah.
She was one of the.
Good sermon, John.
Thank you. Welcome back.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to this. This is cool.
She's out in this chest hole.
Hey, Pam, I'm gonna get started.
Did you go to the game?
Okay, good morning.
Well, that's what, I mean, I just.
I am going to introduce our speaker today. This is written by Doug Otadi. And I will say, I wish Doug Otadi would write something like this about me. Because it's really nice. Like, I'm kind of jealous. Dr. Jaya Jha is the Boone Associate Professor of Economics. She holds a PhD from the University of Minnesota, a Master of Science from the University of Pune, and a BA from the University of Delhi. Her scholarly interests are the areas of economic growth and aspects of development and international trade, and her current research includes an examination of public investment in developing countries, especially in South Asia. She was one of my most theologically interested and astute colleagues. Now, Pam, if you can get Doug to say something like that about me. Okay, welcome, thank you.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having me here. And being willing to listen to me drone on about ethics and the lack of ethics and economics as a discipline and the urgent need for an ethical framework within the way we practice economics and economic policy making. So I will begin with brief remarks on normative issues in economics and the need for an ethical theory in economics. I will then offer brief reflections on the implications of Hindu philosophy, I'm Hindu by birth, and Adam Smith's ethical theory on aspects of economic life. And I will conclude with an exploration of how these perspectives can inform a balanced, ethically guided approach to economic policy. Part of economics is pure science as it relates to accounting for the behavior of people and institutions in the economic arena. But more than most scientists, economists are interested in practical applications. For example, finding better ways of structuring the economic system, whether to intervene in the economy or not, etc. These practical dimensions are a branch of ethics. To the extent that economics is interested in how things ought to be done, these considerations are normative. Not all normative concerns are questions of ethics. For example, I ought to vacuum my car occasionally, but that is a normative requirement, not an ethical one. But when economics investigates contexts where interests of different people collide, normative claims are certainly ethical. This encompasses virtually all normative claims made in economics. For example, to claim that interest rates ought to go down raises a conflict of interest between lenders who stand to lose and borrowers who stand to gain. Economics and economists are notorious for pretending to themselves and others that economics is an ethics-free zone, a positive rather than a normative discipline. Macroeconomists, like myself, do this by focusing on broad national aggregates, GDP, inflation, etc. Microeconomists do so by focusing on efficiency and allegedly value-free or ethically neutral notion. When faced with economic questions that raise ethical issues, yet another popular strategy is to examine the issue by keeping economics separate from ethics, leaving the question of ethics to the specialists. Let us take a notorious example. In December 1991, Lawrence Summers, then the chief economist at the World Bank, sent a memorandum to colleagues containing the following remarks, which are abbreviated here. Quote, just between you and me, shouldn't the World Bank be encouraging more migration of the dirty industries to the less developed countries? I can think of 3 reasons. 1, a given amount of health impairing pollution should be done in the country with the lowest cost, which will be the country with the lowest wages. 2, I've always thought that underpopulated countries in Africa are vastly underpolluted. Their air quality is probably vastly inefficiently high compared to Los Angeles or Mexico City. 3, the demand for a clean environment for aesthetic and health reasons is likely to have a very high income elasticity. The concern over an agent that causes a 1 in a million change in the odds of prostate cancer is obviously going to be much higher in a country where people survive to get prostate cancer, the United States, than in a country where under 5 mortality is 200 per 1,000, a country in Africa. End of quote. While Summers was not seriously proposing a World Bank program to export pollution to the less developed countries, he was clearly making some normative or evaluative claims. These are uncomfortable implications for most economists, and implications that most economists would prefer not to draw. But they offer some insight into some features that are typical of mainstream, value-neutral economics. That is, a focus on outcomes rather than processes. Focus on consequences for individuals rather than for groups or the environment. Focus on welfare rather than other desirable goals of human flourishing, such as freedom, rights, or justice. Defining welfare as the satisfaction of preferences over some mental states, such as happiness or human capabilities, personal relationships, health, etc. What role do ethical notions play in this framework? Ethics are important, but not a concern for economics. Economists have been wary of wading into these murky philosophical waters, yet without some notion that welfare might be, of what welfare might be, and some way of measuring welfare, economics would have no way to evaluate policies or to offer guidance to policymakers. It is plausible that redistributing income from rich countries to less developed countries would increase overall well-being much more than redistributing pollution. Normative and evaluative economics cannot help being ethical from the start. The ethical cannot just be wheeled in when the economics is done. To the extent that economics wrangles with ethics, people's preferences are routinely called upon, and ethical judgments are often left to individual preferences of people who make up society. But it takes an ethical theory to justify the use of preferences for the purposes of assessing people's well-being, and individual preferences themselves may be derived from underlying beliefs. My tradition, Hindu philosophy, offers a nuanced perspective on the ethical responsibilities tied to economic pursuits, emphasizing that the creation and distribution of wealth, also called artha, in fact, economics in Sanskrit is called arthashastra, the study of wealth creation. So emphasizing that the creation and distribution of wealth should always align with moral values and societal welfare. Central to this framework is the concept of dharma, or righteous conduct, which provides a guiding ethical compass in all areas of life, including economics. Dharma dictates that wealth is only truly valuable if it serves both individual prosperity and the broader social good. This perspective on wealth and ethical conduct, which has roots in sacred texts like the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, offers an alternative to purely materialist economic models by emphasizing communal responsibility and moral action. The Purushartha framework in Hindu philosophy lays out 4 primary goals of life: dharma, which is moral duty, artha, which is wealth, kama, which is desire or pleasure, and moksha, which is spiritual liberation. This structure suggests that while the pursuit of wealth is a legitimate aim, it should not overshadow ethical considerations, pleasure, or spiritual growth. Dharma is considered the central pillar of this framework, implying that any pursuit of wealth or artha should remain grounded in ethical principles. The relationship between artha and dharma emphasizes that wealth creation is valid only when it respects and upholds social values, highlighting the idea that wealth should empower individuals to fulfill their duties to society. An important precept in Hindu philosophy is the doctrine of karma, not equivalent to the Western understanding of karma as Schadenfreude. So the doctrine of karma has two sides to it. What has happened is the result of our past actions, and what will happen is also the result of our present actions. While the doctrine has some radically individualistic implications, often abused within the religion also, there is also scope for apportioning blame or dividing the credit between the individual and community. There are stories of kings sharing in the karma earned by their subjects through the performance of good and bad deeds. As such, there is moral responsibility for each other, as well as community responsibility for each other, as well as community responsibility to relieve poverty, hunger, disease, and unhappiness. Failure to do so binds us to the law of karma. Alleviation of poverty and suffering is not morally optional for Hindus. It is a moral imperative in keeping with the concept of dharma, a requirement of justice, metaphysical justice, rather than moral justice, applying universally to all castes, classes, nationalities, and societies. Thus, dharma dictates that those who have only enough resources to alleviate poverty should alleviate it, even if they cannot eliminate it. Those who have the resources to eliminate it should do so. Maybe Elon Musk is listening. Furthermore, Hindu philosophy's emphasis on wealth distribution and charity aligns closely with the concept of dana, or giving, which is considered an essential virtue in the economic sphere. Wealth that serves only personal gain is viewed as morally limited, while wealth that contributes to the community holds ethical value. Hindu texts, including the Mahabharata and the Gita, advocate for the charitable disposition of wealth, encouraging the support of society through philanthropy and social investment, not just to reduce tax liabilities. The concept of sattvic charity, where giving is done selflessly and respectfully, reinforces this, distinguishing it from rajasic charity, which is self-serving, and tamasic charity, which is given begrudgingly or harmfully. Hindu philosophy's focus on the interconnectedness of individual prosperity and communal welfare has modern implication. It advocates for a form of economic engagement that respects ethical responsibilities, aligning individual actions with the collective good. This perspective challenges individualistic capitalism by promoting an ethical framework where economic actions are evaluated not solely on their profitability, but on their ability to contribute to social harmony and to reduction of poverty. Hindu philosophy views wealth as a tool for advancing societal well-being and by aligning economic pursuits with moral values. It envisions a balanced economy that sustains both individual and communal prosperity. I'll now talk about my favorite economist, the father of economics, Adam Smith, and Adam Smith's vision for moral economics. Let us now move into society as envisioned by the father of economics, Adam Smith. Adam Smith's economic philosophy, as presented in the Theory of Moral Sentiments and the Wealth of Nations, offers a complex vision of moral economics that intertwines self-interest with ethical responsibility and societal welfare. Contrary to the popular portrayal of Smith as a proponent of pure self-interest, His work reflects a deep understanding of the ethical dimensions of economic actions and advocates for a balanced approach in which personal gain aligns with social good. Smith believed that while self-interest motivates economic exchange, it should be tempered by moral sentiments and virtues like sympathy, justice, and public spirit to maintain social harmony. In the theory of moral sentiments, Smith explores how human behavior is shaped not only by self-love, but also by sympathy, the ability to understand and share in the experiences of others. He suggests that sympathy fosters a sense of responsibility, creating a moral basis for economic actions. The ethical insight challenges the simplistic view of Smith as the guru of selfishness and reveals his belief that people possess a natural concern for others' well-being. For Smith, self-interest is a powerful motivator, but it does not operate in isolation. It exists alongside empathy, which guides individuals to act justly. Thus, economic actions motivated by self-interest are balanced by moral considerations, supporting a society where individual and collective prosperity can coexist. What did Adam Smith, the father of economics and allegedly the great defender of unfettered markets, have to say about labor justice? According to Smith, although wages are set by contracts between workers and employers, their interests are opposed, with workers at a structural disadvantage. He says, quote, "The workmen desire to get as much, the masters to give as little as possible," end of quote. And Smith knows well that the natural asymmetry of power in labor markets, particularly in societies where labor unions are restricted, such as the United States, means that employers have the advantage in labor disputes and are able to force workers to comply with their terms. Moreover, quote, "In all such disputes, the masters can hold out much longer," end of quote. In fact, the political and legal power structure is usually stacked against workers. While we hear frequently of labor unions clamoring for more power, we, quote, "rarely hear of the combinations of masters," Smith says. Even though, quote, "masters are always and everywhere in a sort of tacit but constant and uniform combination not to raise the wages of labor above their actual rate," end of quote. Sometimes even entering into agreements to, quote, "sink the wages of labor even below this rate," end of quote. These agreements being conducted with utmost silence and secrecy. Those are Adam Smith's words. Desperate workers must, quote, "either starve or frighten their masters into immediate compliance with their demands," end of quote. Employers, in turn, never cease to solicit the help of governments, calling for rigorous execution of those laws which have been enacted with so much severity against labor unions. According to Adam Smith, high wages are a sure sign of a progressive society. Quote, "It is not in the richest countries, but in the most thriving that the wages of labor are highest," end of quote. What then is the proper role of government in a progressive society? As commonly understood, Adam Smith advocated for laissez-faire, which is let the market alone. Smith lays out three roles for government. First, protection against the violence and invasion of other countries. Second, maintaining internal law and order to provide an, quote, "exact administration of justice," which he has defined in the theory of moral sentiments. And third, building and maintaining public works, which may be in the highest degree advantageous to a great society, but works that can usually not be undertaken by the private sector. Crucially, Smith recognizes that the progressive development of a just society that values and promotes individual liberty requires educated and engaged workers as participants in thoughtful discourse. Even more, although division of labor is the wellspring of economic growth, this specialization can, quote, become so refined and the work so mindless in the most menial of jobs that it can stultify the mind. Smith says, quote, the man whose whole life is spent in performing a few simple operations generally becomes as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become. Maybe Jeff Bezos is listening. It is the responsibility of the state to provide public education so the working class has, quote, the energy, opportunity, and incentive to participate vigorously and constructively in the market system and in civil society, end of quote. What of other welfare legislation? The great economic historian Robert Heilbronner notes that welfare legislation was virtually absent in Smith's time, save poor relief. He says, quote, the question of whether the working class should have a voice in the direction of economic affairs simply did not enter any respectable person's mind, end of quote. But Smith's vision even demands a role for government in several areas of public interest: environmental protection, research and development, healthcare, and yes, labor rights. In fact, although such regulations may be regarded as a violation of natural liberty, quote, Smith says, those exertions of the natural liberty of a few individuals which might endanger the security of the whole society are and ought to be restrained by the laws of all governments, of the most free as well as of the most despotical, end of quote. In spite of his express hostility towards the motives of monopolists who, quote, seldom meet together except to conspire against the public or to raise prices, end of quote, and generally have an interest to deceive and even to oppress the public, Smith has been mischaracterized. Smith, and therefore the economics discipline, what it has inherited, has been mischaracterized as the patron saint of rapacious self-interest. Shortly after the publication of his magnum opus, The Wealth of Nations was quoted, including by English parliamentarians who confessed to never having read his book, to oppose government laws restraining the shackling of children to machines in English factories. But Smith's vision of a well-governed society was one that extended the fruits of progress and economic growth to, quote, the lowest ranks of the people, with the metric of a good society being the condition of the working class. To Smith, all humans were born equal with similar capabilities, and the inequalities in society were socially generated, intensified by the lack of education and crippling nature of the work that members of the working class were forced to do by economic circumstances. Adam Smith, the moral philosopher, had an unequivocal commitment to equity through just laws and institutions maintained by a progressive state. He says, and I quote, is the improvement in the circumstances of the lower ranks of people to be regarded as an advantage or as an inconveniency to the whole? What improves the circumstances of the greater part can never be regarded as an inconveniency to the whole. No society can surely be flourishing and happy of which the far greater part of the members are poor and miserable. It is but equity, besides, that they who feed, clothe, and lodge the whole body of the people should have such a share of the produce of their own labor as to be themselves tolerably well fed, clothed, and lodged. Smith's insights into labor justice and the right to fair returns further underscore his vision of a moral economy, while laborers who contribute directly to the economy deserve fair compensation that allows them to live with dignity. For Smith, economic justice is foundational to a stable and prosperous society, as extreme inequality undermines social cohesion and creates discontent. This balanced view of markets is a crucial part of Smith's legacy. He understood that while markets are effective in coordinating economic activity, they can lead to negative outcomes if left unchecked. Smith believed in the ethical and practical necessity of motivating forces beyond self-interest, warning that societies that prioritize profit without considering human welfare risk instability. In Smith's moral framework, virtues like justice, public spirit, and humanity should guide economic behavior, preventing the exploitation of workers and ensuring that prosperity benefits the broader community. The 2008 financial crisis, for example, highlighted the consequences of unchecked self-interest and unethical practices within financial institutions, leading to widespread mistrust in markets. Had these institutions indeed followed a Smithian approach, guided by the impartial spectator and a sense of sympathy, they might have prioritized transparency and responsible lending practices over profit maximization, potentially avoiding or mitigating the crisis. Smith's perspective on ethics within market behavior suggests that economic policies and corporate governance must integrate moral considerations to ensure stability, fairness, and public trust. In essence, Smith's vision of moral economics suggests a model where markets function best within a framework of ethical responsibility. By advocating for fair treatment of labor, institutional checks on market abuses, and a recognition of sympathy as a natural human sentiment, Smith provides an ethical foundation for economics. His vision, even though it has become sidelined wholesale by the economics discipline, remains relevant today, as it underscores the importance of balancing individual ambition with social welfare, advocating for an economic system where individual prosperity does not come at the expense of collective well-being. So now I'd like to offer some comparative points, comparing the issues we talked about I discussed in Hindu philosophy and the Smithian notion of economic justice. So Hindu philosophy and Adam Smith's economic thought, though originating from vastly different cultural and intellectual traditions, share a common ethical foundation that emphasizes the need for justice and responsibility within economic pursuits. Both frameworks advocate for an economic model in which wealth creation is not solely self-serving, but rather a means to uplift society. By prioritizing social welfare and moral responsibilities, both perspectives challenge the idea that economics operates independently of ethics and instead promotes a vision of wealth that aligns with the broader needs and values of society. So let's look at wealth, one example of wealth as a tool for social good. If you recall, we said Hindu philosophy does not require you to not accumulate wealth, so long as wealth accumulation is done morally, ethically, and without causing harm to others, all species, human and non-human species, and the environment. Hindu philosophy places a significant ethical obligation on individuals regarding their wealth, viewing it not as a personal asset, but as a tool for social benefit. Dharma, or righteous conduct, guides how individuals approach wealth or artha, mandating that it be used to support the welfare of others and to contribute to social harmony. Wealth from this viewpoint is validated by how it benefits society. Charitable giving, support for those in need, and actions that foster communal well-being are all viewed as essential moral responsibilities. The Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata underscored this perspective, proposing that wealth without charity lacks moral value, and even suggesting that unshared wealth leads to social degradation. Similarly, Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations advocates for a moral economy in which the pursuit of wealth must account for the well-being of the entire society. His famous statement, "No society can surely be flourishing and happy of which the far greater part of the members are poor and miserable," demonstrates his conviction that prosperity cannot be achieved if inequality persists and large segments of the population are left in poverty. Like Hindu philosophy, Smith emphasizes that the fruits of economic labor should be accessible to all, not only as a matter of fairness, but as essential to the stability and happiness of society. He argues that economic growth should translate into tangible improvements for workers and other key contributors, not simply enrich the few. Both perspectives position wealth as a means to achieve social good, not as an end in itself. On individual responsibility and collective good, Hindu philosophy and Smith both advocate for individual responsibility within the economic sphere, but do so with differing emphases. Hindu philosophy's ethical guidelines, rooted in karma and dharma, hold that wealth creation must be inherently responsible and beneficial to the collective. Wealth is morally justified only when it serves the greater community, underlining that personal success cannot come at the expense of others. Hindu ethical teachings advocate for charity and welfare, considering them integral to the proper use of wealth, and argue that failing to use wealth in the service of others disrupts social as well as spiritual harmony. Smith, while advocating for self-interest as a natural driver of economic activity, tempers this by emphasizing the importance of virtues like sympathy, justice, and harmony. In the theory of moral sentiments, Smith argues that self-interest is not inherently harmful if it coexists with a sense of moral responsibility towards others. Promoting an economic model in which self-interest operates within an ethical framework that respects the rights and dignity of others, particularly laborers. Together, Hindu philosophy and Smith's economic thought articulate a vision of an economy grounded in justice, wealth creation and distribution being guided by ethical responsibility. Both frameworks advocate for economic policies and behaviors that reduce inequality, protect vulnerable members of society, and promote communal well-being. They challenge a purely profit-driven economy, proposing instead a system where ethical considerations and social obligations take precedence. This convergence of ethical economics underscores the importance of integrating moral principles into economic systems, promoting an economic model that respects the dignity of individuals and social harmony. So let's look at some contemporary extensions of these two perspectives and the policy implications that arise from the Hindu philosophy on economic life and Adam Smith's moral philosophy. So Amartya Sen, the Nobel laureate in economics, his capabilities approach is one of the most influential frameworks in development economics, drawing directly from the ethical considerations present in both Hindu philosophy and Smith's moral economy. Sen's approach shifts the focus from economic growth alone to the real freedoms and capabilities people have to lead fulfilling lives that they value. This perspective, as he discussed in his seminal work, Development as Freedom, aligns closely with Hindu philosophy's emphasis on dharma and the holistic goals of Purushartha. Just as wealth must serve moral conduct in Hindu thought, Sen's capabilities approach suggests that wealth is valuable only insofar as it enables people to achieve their full potential and live with dignity. This approach has far-reaching policy implications. Rather than relying solely on traditional economic metrics like GDP, Sen's framework advocates for policies that expand access to education, healthcare, public parks, free time to see your family and friends, free time to contemplate politics, and other essential resources that support human development. For instance, public health programs, social protection schemes, and educational initiatives are central to improving capabilities and, by extension, social welfare. Such policies reflect the ethical grounding in both Hindu philosophy and Smith's thought, reinforcing that an economy's success lies in its capacity to foster individual well-being and freedom to live the lives they value, not just aggregate wealth. In fact, Amartya Sen was foundational in helping establish a new metric that the World Bank now compiles called the Gross National Happiness Index. And we in America are not doing so well on that metric. But anyway. What about inequality and social stability? Economists like Joseph Stiglitz, another Nobel laureate, and Thomas Piketty, a future Nobel laureate, have highlighted the destabilizing effects of unchecked inequality, reinforcing the ethical imperatives found in both Hindu philosophy and Smith's writings. In The Price of Inequality, Stiglitz argues that economic systems concentrating wealth among the few create profound social and political instability, eroding democratic processes and fostering social discord. Piketty's research in Capital in the 21st Century shows that without redistribution, economic systems naturally lead to widening inequality, exacerbating disparities in wealth and opportunity. These insights echo Smith's assertion that no society can flourish when a large portion of its members are poor and marginalized. They also reflect Hindu philosophy's focus on the duty to alleviate poverty and support social welfare. I should say, the spiritual, ethical, multi-generational, multi-universal duty. Policymakers today can address these ethical concerns through progressive taxation, wealth and inheritance taxes, and social safety nets, which help reduce inequality and assure that prosperity is shared. These measures not only support social cohesion, but also create a more stable economic environment, preventing the disintegration of social bonds that extreme inequality fosters. Let's think about what these approaches mean for sustainable development and ecological economics. Sustainable development, a concept championed by ecological economists like Herman Daly, also aligns with the ethical tenets of both Hindu philosophy and Smith's vision of a balanced economy. Herman Daly's ecological economics highlights the limits of traditional economic growth models, which often prioritize profit over environmental and social health. He advocates for a steady state economy where economic activities respect ecological boundaries and promote long-term sustainability over short-term gains. In Hindu philosophy, respect for the environment and all living beings is integral to the ethical framework of dharma. I mean, this is what I'm hoping to use to get out of mowing my lawn and with the HOA in my neighborhood. The concept of non-harm or ahimsa extends beyond interpersonal relations to encompass environmental stewardship, recognizing the interdependence between human prosperity and ecological health. Similarly, Smith's belief in natural liberty suggests an ethical obligation to respect nature, cautioning against economic activities that harm collective well-being. Today, policies that promote renewable energy, resource conservation, and green technologies can draw from these ethical foundations to build economies that are not only prosperous, but definitely sustainable and resilient. Building on the ethical foundations of Hindu philosophy and Smith's moral philosophy, contemporary policies can prioritize equitable growth and social welfare, Progressive taxation, universal health care, and public education are practical applications of these principles, aiming to distribute resources more fairly and protect the welfare of all citizens. Such policies address the ethical concerns of both frameworks, prevent wealth concentration, providing basic needs, and creating opportunities for upward mobility. Corporate social responsibility initiatives and ethical business practices align with these values, promoting a culture where profit is balanced with social good. By promoting fair distribution, ecological balance, and a focus on human well-being, these frameworks support an inclusive economic system that values both individual and collective prosperity. Embracing these policies, policymakers can design strategies that encourage sustainable ethical growth, fostering a world where economic progress uplifts not only individuals, but entire communities. I got a bunch more, but I think I'm going to end here because it sounds like a good point to end these reflections. Thank you very much.
We'll have time for questions and answers, and if you have a question, say it real loud so the Zoom people can hear it, and I'll repeat it, or Dr. Jha will repeat it. So, questions?
It sounds like almost immediately, I know little about Adam Smith. I mean, I've known what I was told is basically every man for himself seemed to be could you get like a paragraph, right, sometime in high school or college. But anyway, it sounds like it was immediately, used to other purposes. And I just want to know, like, was that the case, right? Was it just like immediately used to people to go for just, go for all the gusto kind of, or did it kind of come and go? Do you know what I mean?
Yes. So the question is whether Adam Smith's work was immediately used for the worst business practices and the worst developments in economics, or whether it took some time and there were ups and downs.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it was used almost immediately. So the first book that Adam Smith published was The Theory of Ethics. He was a professor of moral philosophy, and his first book was The Theory of Moral Sentiments, and its 5th edition was also the last thing he worked on. And he was so disappointed with the way that Wealth of Nations was received and abused in his lifetime that on his deathbed, he had a close friend of his bring close to 900 pages of unpublished manuscript that he had set on fire, lest it be abused after his death. So the book was abused almost immediately. We also should remember that Smith was writing at a time where the fruits of industrial revolution, the first industrial revolution, had begun to show up, where people had started moving from the rural countryside to work in factories, work long 12, 14, 16-hour days, live in coffin-sized beds on the factory floor, know about the chaining of children. And most of this was done by the power that mercantilists at the time, the same people who were colonizing much of the world for Her Majesty, they were doing it under protection from the government. So when Smith in his Wealth of Nations talks about not interfering with the market, he is really talking to the government policies that was supporting monopolists who were colonizing the rest of the world and destroying people, cultures, societies, and environment in the rest of the world. So naturally then, his work was immediately put to use, abused by industrialists, mercantilists at the time, to prevent any government interference in the form of humane laws that would impair their ability to seek unrestrained profit.
I was caught by a quotation from Lawrence Summers and the things he suggested. I guess the question is, first of all, was he serious? And secondly, how could you make those kinds of statements comport with any kind of ethical framework?
So the question is whether Lawrence Summers' comments were serious, and if they were, how do we, and especially the president of the World Bank, which formerly called the Institution, for Reconstruction and Development, right? How would that comport with any sort of ethical framework? So Lawrence Summers was dead serious. And Lawrence Summers has been the Treasury Secretary. He's served as the president of Harvard University. He's made very gendered and sexist comments about women's, in his position as the president of Harvard University, made gendered comments about women's ability to do math and science, after which he had to resign because it was alleged that this person is also then deciding which female faculty get tenure and do not. So he had to resign. Lawrence Summers has had a very strong grip and continues to have a very strong grip on economics. He is a wonderful economist in the way that economists value economics. I suppose I'm using the wrong word. Let's just say rate economics work. Highly mathematical, very precise policy implications. This note from 1991, he is absolutely serious, even though it was an offhand, like private email exchange with his group that he was having, and it was leaked to the media. As somebody coming from a developing country, as somebody who practices and studies development economics, and has generally been exceptionally skeptical of developed country policies, including those of humanitarian agencies that are mostly funded and governed by developed country governments. I can tell you that these policies have actually been put in place. So our trash continues to go to African countries today. We do export our trash.
We do.
Yes, we do. We do export our nuclear waste. So definitely these comments may have been somewhat, if he knew it would come to the public, anybody would have clothed it in more mathematical terms. I must say, I'm never going to be as smart a mathematician or economist as Lawrence Summers is. I have tremendous respect for his ability as an economist. But the moral bankruptcy of the discipline is very evident in these considerations, in these comments by Summers. The claim that economists make, the claim that most economics textbooks, even at the undergraduate level, make, they will say in the introduction, economics is a positive science. We do not wade into normative considerations. And therefore, these comments, the way we are trained, and we train other economists, including our students, is we only see the marginal cost, marginal benefit, the cost-benefit analysis, which is sound. Just strictly speaking, the way the mathematical theory justifies what Summers is saying. But that only goes to show that how first we clearly say and believe that there are no normative implications, but we're not even aware that there are normative implications and unwilling to take responsibility for the normative implications inherent in such trade-offs.
Well, how do they? So they've got an economics expressed by this fellow. Sounds anyway. So how did they? What am I trying to say? What are they looking for? You say cost benefit. Benefit to who? I mean, even in their terms, what would it be?
So this is very interesting. So the question is, if we are looking, if Larry Summers and a lot of economists, most economists, I would say, are thinking about maximizing benefits, minimizing costs, benefits to who, costs to whom. So the overall concept that economists use is efficiency. In fact, it's such a normal part of my diction that I don't even realize that I know anymore the difference between the economics version, meaning of efficiency, and anything else. This is a confession. That's the training that we all have, which is I cannot explain the term efficiency in any way other than in economics ways, even though it's just an English language term. The way that what we are trying to achieve efficiency in is we are trying to maximize overall utility. Now, the foundation, the intellectual foundation for that is from Jeremy Bentham, came up with the idea of utilitarianism, who said the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So we've taken that precept, and we can trace the development of utilitarian thinking and modeling in economics, where we come up with the concept of utils, and at some point the marginalist revolution did a sleight of hand where utils could be converted into dollars, and something that was not supposed to be quantified in money suddenly became quantified. And so now we maximize the overall dollar value, leaving the redistribution that is necessary to those who care about normative stuff, and saying that that redistribution needs to happen, but we cannot comment on that. I will add a point here that when Bentham was talking about the greatest good for the greatest number of people, and this I will credit to Professor Ottati, who showed me that at the time, the greatest good for the greatest number of people, there was something about like a capital G good. What is good? But that's not what we engage with. The way economists practice it is, well, my preferences are more equality. So I can go and make money hand over fist. Process doesn't matter. Then I can spend the money towards the most charitable causes and repair the inequality that I see in life. So we've reduced all of this to personal preferences, personal action, and outcomes in the end. I can value equality, you can value poverty, someone else can value a big house, someone else can value a big car, whatever it is. But the notion of the philosophical, ethical foundation of utilitarianism was completely lost in economics, particularly at the start of the 20th century, maybe end of the 19th century.
So I don't know if to put this as a statement or not, but it seems to me as though there's a certain segment of the American population, I only say American population, that treats economists as hubris. I hate to put it that way, but that I think is a basic fact. They're more interested in their own self-interest. And having an MBA myself, but starting out in history for a master's degree, then switching back, I think there's an economic causation throughout history that we see, regardless. And people's self-interest on the smallest scale is more important to them. And I think that's typical of this particular political scene right now that we have, that is probably at any time in our history. And if we look back at modern presidents, Teddy Roosevelt, maybe Lyndon Johnson were the people most interested in settling that line. But I think it's almost as if we need to teach a course in politics, economics, and history to study it together over a century.
I completely agree with, so the remark is that, the economics education, and which is now education in general, which is being reflected in politics today and for a few decades, has prioritized only individual self-interest, and that we need to educate people on history politics and economics and philosophy as well. I could not agree more. I think if we start talking about the deficiencies in the education system, what we do learn in the United States and what we do not, we would need like a whole semester if that would not be sufficient. I think this is, I can tell you about my education at Delhi University. The reason I became an economist, I decided to at least go for a master's. I was good at math, so micro, macro, stats, metrics, I was flying through it, and to me it just seemed like math, which was fine. But it was not until I studied development, economic development and economic systems where I started reading things about Marxism, capitalism by historical writers, reading texts on imperialism, reading texts on syndicalism, reading about the historical deindustrialization of several developing countries through colonization. I mean, it was those ethical issues that, and real consequences, explored not necessarily quantitatively the way I have trained myself to study them, but very historically and philosophically grounded. That's the reason I became an economist. And I was very surprised to learn once I got to the United States of America for my PhD, and I started as a teaching assistant. I was in grad school, that there were no courses on the history of economic thought. Not only were they not required, there were no courses. In fact, even at liberal arts colleges, unless the department is a heterodox department, which very few are in the country, you do not find courses on economic history, courses on economic philosophy, courses on comparative economic systems. I, for one, sometimes, actually frequently believe that I got a better education at my poor $100 a year tuition college than the one that I'm giving to my students here, just because of the paradigm we're in the United States. Even the London School of Economics and British universities have a more diversity of courses than economics departments in the United States do. I do teach a course called What's Wrong with Economics? And you're all welcome to come to that. And I used to teach another course called Great Books in Economics, because these were things that motivated me to think more critically about my discipline and my education. So
that sounds much like what I had as an undergraduate worldly philosopher, where we talked about Malthus and others and Keynesian philosophy.
Dr. Jha, it is time. We want to thank you for opening our eyes to the ethical foundations of Hindu philosophy and the moral vision of Adam Smith. I had no idea. This has been fascinating. Thank you so much.
thank you so much.
That was great.
I worry that I like Adam Smith so much that I can just keep talking about it.
But who, I have no idea. This is so grounded in what's important, especially now. Oh my gosh.
But especially, I remember I was showing a passage and I just covered everything and just showed a passage to a professor from sociology. And he said, oh, that's Marx, isn't it? I'm like, no.
Who knew? Well, you gotta get out there preaching.
And did have classes because she's not.
I would read some questions.
They had a class. So I'm gonna lecture. I've got about 4 You did not talk directly. What is your issues?
And it's only gotten worse because even the solutions we propose, like carbon taxes and carbon offset, I can continue polluting, I just have to pay money, and someone else can provide. And now we're exporting pollution. I mean, ethically philosophically, what are carbon offsets? I don't have to change my behavior, I don't have to show any responsibility, I just have to.
His big example was lakes in the Adirondacks. Crystal clear. Because of pollution from, I guess it was upstate New York and eastern Ontario that were spewed. But it was a huge concern, and it never, I was speaking on nature, it never resurfaced as a major town.
And it will surface even less now, they can always dispose.
Absolutely. Discussion about costs. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
This was a quick trip through my.
Thank you, that means so much to me, thank you.
There's a big one.
No, we haven't, but you know, inflation has gone up so much too. And the thing is, inflation has come down, but prices have gone. Inflation coming down, inflation simply means the rate of growth of prices. So instead of prices going up at 8% per year, now they're going up to 5%. But for my car insurance rate will not come down once inflation is in. So the thing, if the wages don't go up, we will see riots on the streets, and that's what Smith is saying, like 2 points. Right. This is from my hometown, my lawn garden. Thank you. It's actually snow Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Tuesday. Thank you so much.
So you taught us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would love to talk sometime, but really.
Challenge usually you have some problems with the corruption of government, so it makes it difficult, whatever we do. That's the
These are some fancy shoes you got on.
Yeah, I think you're right. My perspective is that not but somehow it works because we've actually some forms of corruption and we think about corruption as more.
Well, they look great. I like that.
Yeah,
I have
Musk is
photo.
offering $1 million for people to buy politics. You know, so to me, like that's at least it's out in the open.
Yeah.
So
here.
You're right, that there is a lot of corruption, but you know, somehow we make things work here.
Shoes. Did you get those?
It's like, this new experience for me.
You know, did he constantly stop? Because, you know, what you're wearing, your great fashion sense.
Oh, yeah.
So what's Nancy up to?
I don't know, she just wasn't coming to.
I know, she's just.
Absolutely, you keep
she
talking
said
about handouts to people, like, will somebody talk about handouts to corporations? This is a country where we want capitalism for the poor and socialism for the rich, I mean, that's what has built this
Well, I was
country.
watching LSU.
Oh.
But the
thank you so
Dodgers.
much. I didn't catch your name, so.
Is that 2 games now?
Two.
Okay, Frank Bragg, so nice to meet
I'll
you.
watch it. We're about to see the finish off the game.
I would too.
Ooh, it's great. I really enjoy that.
Well done.
See, now I'm done now, so now I don't have to worry about it. I was begging him like, oh shit, do you want to switch with me?
He didn't tell me that. He didn't say.
No, because I'm next week.
Oh, you're next week.
That's
What are
what,
you-
so we were
what are you
trying to
talking
decide. Latin American.
Oh, yeah.
Politics.
Mhm.
Probably talk about Gustavo Gutierrez dying. I don't know, maybe
Mhm.
was supposed to give somebody a title, never did. Latin American theology and.
Yeah.
I might put in the common good, you know, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I only gave him the title on Thursday, so you've got time.
And so started thinking about a little bit. Last couple
Well,
of days, but
So Doug's over there somewhere in Charlotte teaching something.
something.
That's good, isn't it? So you're somewhere teaching something.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming also, thank you. I was happy to see like some friends in the room.
I wanted to be here when you.
Got everything you need?
Yes, yes.
All right. I wondered if you have time to go get lunch.
Yes, yes.
Good. So Matt said we could.
Why don't cut it off?